Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick, and you are at MSFS Flight Plans, a place where my only objective is to show you the coolest, most interesting, best-looking places in the world to fly over, and then learn as much as we can about what's going on the ground, because before each flight, I will spend just a couple of days trying to jam my brain full of as much as I can figure out about what we'll be looking at down there on the ground, just to make sure you always have something to do in the sim. Today we'll be covering 2 oceans, 2 continents, all in the course of one short flight in what may be the only place on Earth where we could do anything like that, and it is the Panama Canal. And not only is there a feast of history and global significance out here, but I also picked up the Panama City pack from ORBX. I actually got it about a month ago, but I haven't put it in yet and taken a look at anything out here. So we will put it through its paces together and see what we think of that. And the last time I was out here was probably about a year ago, and the only thing I remember is that I was a little bit disappointed in how the scenery looked, the default scenery. So I don't know if there's maybe been a world update that improved it or not, but we'll see how ORBX did dusting everything up for us. And if you saw the end of our last tour out in Orlando, you know that the Twin Otter here is one of my top 3 favorite planes to fly, despite all the issues which have become kind of a plague for this plane over the last year or so. So I'm just holding my breath and hoping they'll eventually fix those or maybe re-release it, but I just love flying this plane. And as you can see, I did find some freeware Panama livery for it, which is really cool. So we'll get started up real quick, and then we'll be on our way, and I'll start telling you about all the cool stuff there is to see out here. Let's get our fuel pumps on. And so far, I just noticed when I was looking around here before, you can already see some of these cranes sticking up in the air over here. That's over at the port of Cologne, which we'll take a look at. And in addition to the ORBX pack that I have installed, I also have a pack for the airport, which was freeware that we're coming into, not this one. There was nothing available for this one. But it was just a slight modification pack. Fix some of the paint, some of the taxiway indicators, things like that. I don't think it was a complete overhaul. All right, right engine, get that baby going. Get our GPS going. And if this is your first time on the channel, one of the things that I make sure I always do is include this exact flight plan, which I try my best to meticulously draw out if anyone else wants to take it on autopilot, so that all the distances from everything and the angles of approach will be as good as I can get them for seeing the stuff that's going on the ground. And that will be in the video description. So the way you have to do it, if you haven't done it before, is pull the flight plan into little NavMap. That's where the link will take you, and then you just can pull it from little NavMap into the sim. And if you don't know how to do that, I made a short tutorial video somewhere down in our archives about how to do that as well. All right, I think we're in pretty good shape. So let's just get our parking brake off. Go ahead and give it 1 notch of flaps. And a good flight level for this is probably between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. I think that'll probably do just right for you. And I used a few cloud settings because with the live weather, the wind was pretty tame, but when we got to the other coast, there were some low clouds that were kind of obscuring things, so I took that off because I want to make sure that wasn't an issue for us. And this whole area out here, vegetation-wise, if you've never been here in real life, is tropical rainforest. As you can see by all these lush trees out here. And I did notice a lot of those trees whose stumps didn't go all the way to the ground. We've been seeing a lot of that at some of the airports lately, so that was nice. And we're on the Atlantic side. That's where we're starting from. We're going to fly back south, so once we get turned around, we'll be heading south, get up to our cruising altitude, and then circle back out over the Atlantic, and then come right down the canal as we check out the city of Cologne and the locks on this side. And I have no ship traffic turned on, and I don't think it would have even been necessary if I wanted to, because in the thumbnails I saw for that ORBX pack, there were lots and lots of ships that they built into it. And I have my graphics settings turned all the way up across the board, and when I took my test flight before, I didn't have any issues, but the add-on pack wasn't installed before, so hopefully there won't be any issues that we'll run into with that. Looks like all those trees are going right to the ground, doesn't it? That's real nice. I can only imagine how humid it is out here. But it can't be much worse than Florida. Although this time of year, man, it's weird because during the day right now, and if you're watching this sometime way after I recorded it, it's just at the beginning of November, but in the daytime it's getting up to like 85 degrees here in Jacksonville. But at night it gets down to like 50, so you have to make sure you pack accordingly if you're going anywhere out around town at sunset. Alright, let's see. Get our baro checked. That looks good. Landing lights on. Got our 1 notch of flaps already down. And our CDI is good. Alright, let's do this. And I really can't put my finger on what it is that I love so much about this plane. And every time I say that, someone will usually put in the comments, a Twin Otter, question mark? Really? I think it might be the engine noises that are a part of it for me, which is probably also why I like the Chancellor so much. That thing sounds incredible. I did not just pull my yoke back as much as it looked like I did there in the sim. I just barely touched it. But we get off the ground, and that's what we're trying to do, so big success. And there's Cologne out there. And that big bridge, I'll tell you all about that stuff we got here. And man, like most of you, if you grew up in the US, and they probably do it around the world, I had to do a bunch of reports and stuff about the Panama Canal back when I was in grade school. Make little dioramas and blocks and things like that. So I thought I just knew everything there was to know, flaps up, about the Panama Canal, until I started researching this flight and realized there was a heck of a lot that I did not know. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that up. Oh, it won't let me do it. Alright, well I'm just going to drive ourselves up to our cruising altitude, and then I'll turn the autopilot on, or it's going to keep doing that 1,000 feet away alert. Let's just crank that way up so it'll stop doing that. Whoa. I got to taste the old glare shield there. So the town of Cologne, which we'll see in just a minute, was founded in 1850 as a railroad town built to help East Coast 49ers from the U.S. throw their lives away just a little bit faster and far safer than traveling across the U.S. frontier or around the tip of South America, which is how they used to get to the west coast of the U.S., which was extremely dangerous. And in those days, many Americans became permanent residents out here after discovering they could make a lot more money bilking miners than being miners. Maybe selling them pickaxes and blue jeans and panning bowls. So the Americans started calling this town Aspinwall, which was the name of a local railroad promoter who I'm sure had nothing to do with getting a town named after himself. It's going to stop telling us that we got a terrain issue here in just a minute once we get a little bit higher. But the Spaniards continued to call it Cologne, named after Christopher Columbus, for reasons I'll tell you about momentarily. So there's our airport there. And let's see, here's our first look at the docks. And you can tell that although these cranes look great, and look at all those big ships out there. No traffic turned on. Those were all injected by ORBX, I'm assuming. But this was the issue was having even before the add-on pack. All of the little containers and cars and stuff they'd have out here, all just flat. But that does look a lot better already, I can tell. Alright, so let's just stop right here as far as our altitude goes. Get ourselves on track for the navigation. And I think I'm going to have to come over a little bit more. I'm too far away from my line. Not a problem. So this city built up a little street cred when it burned to the ground in the Colombian Civil War of 1885. This used to all be the country of Colombia before there was a country called Panama here. And then it burned down again in 1915, and one more time just for good measure in 1940. But only 2/3 of the town burned down then. The whole place didn't burn. Coastlines look pretty good down there. Alright, let's try our nav again. Alright, we got it now. But from about 1950 on, the city kind of descended, this city out here, Cologne, into a bit of chaos and ruin under the rule of some less than pleasant dictators, like Manuel Noriega. You probably heard about him. But in 2014, I read they started a big cleanup project out here to kind of revitalize Cologne. And there's a big cruise ship terminal out here. I don't know if we'll see any cruise ships out here. And I've never been out here, though I've taken plenty of cruises. But they said one of the big attractions, of course, is going to tour the locks and then doing rainforest tours out here. For those of us that don't get to see too many rainforests. Boy, that is a lot of ships out there. A couple of noteworthy people from Cologne, or at least who were born here. If you ever watch Fox News, and I try not to ever watch any news if I can avoid it these days, except financial news, which I have to for my regular career. Juan Williams, Fox News commentator, was from Cologne. So was Major League Baseball Hall of Famer Rod Carew. And this one shocked me. Senator John McCain was born on a U.S. submarine base down here called Coco Solo, which was closed in 1960. So these are all some parks out here, and I don't know if they're newer parks or not, but right down here on this very tip is a place that was some old 6-inch cannon batteries from the U.S. forts when they were out here, called Battery Morgan. But all they have now is just the concrete pads where those used to sit. And as you can see, container shipping is big business out here. Real big business. And oil tankers. So right down here you can see the mouth of the river Chares. And that was the original waterway that was used to traverse a portion of this isthmus before the canal was built. And at the mouth of the river right out here, you can still see the remains of Fort San Lorenzo, which we won't see because we're not heading that direction. And that was built in 1601, but that site was discovered by none other than Christopher Columbus himself on his fourth and final voyage in 1502, which is why they named the town Colon, which sounds nothing like Columbus, but maybe in Spanish it somehow relates to it. And at the southern end of what's left of the river, there's a double dam down here, which looks great in the sim, but we're going to kind of fly right over it, so we won't get a good look at it. But I'll show you all that stuff on the end, and I'll tell you why they built that dam. So this big bridge right here is called the Atlantico. And when you look at it on a little nav map, it looks like it's still under construction because they didn't finish that till 2016, 2017 maybe. And this was the first vehicle land crossing out here. They didn't make that till 2017. So I think what they were doing before that was having to take ferries across. You could get across the locks up here, but they were just like little utility bridges. You couldn't just drive your car across that. And as you can see, it appears that there's 2 sets of locks, but there's actually 3 because this one is the old one, the original one. And there's 2 parallel locks that run here so ships can go through both ways. And that one's called the Gatlin locks, G-A-T-L-U-N. And they started operating things there in 1914. And it's got 3 flights, and so does this one over here, that bring people down to the level of the Atlantic Ocean. Let's slow down a little bit so we can get a good look at those. So here's where those dams are right here. Again, we're going to fly right over them, so we won't get a great look at it. But they do look good in the sim if you want to swing out a little bit further, but I want to make sure we could see the locks really well. So as ships grew larger over time, surpassing what is known as the Panamax hull width limitation used to get through the locks, they have to be smaller than that width. They decided to build this big thing here to go to the new Panamax hull width, which apparently is the official title for the bigger ships. And that thing wasn't open until 2016, that other one over there. But look at that. Ooh, man, that looks good. Really well detailed. And on this one, they have little locomotives that they tie the ships up to that run along tracks. That is what pulls them through there. And it looks like this one. See that little tugboat right there? When you look at them on the satellite maps, it looks like tugs are pushing and pulling them through this one, but this has those little locomotives on here. That, look at that. Is that one right there? Look at that. They got a little animated one running down the side. It's moving. Well, that's cool. And there's that. There's the dam right there. Look at that. So there's one dam there, and then there's the other one here. So before I started researching this flight, I was under the impression that the purpose of the locks was to account for the varying elevations of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, so they wouldn't just have a torrent of raging water rushing through here as the tides slosh back and forth. Well, it turns out that was one of the reasons, but the full story is far more interesting than that. That Chares River that I mentioned earlier went a pretty good ways across the little land bridge here to the other side, but it was far too curvy and narrow, and the water was too swift moving in some places to safely move the ships through. So they built those dams back there to stop up the river and raise the water level 85 feet to form what we see here in front of us, which is now called Gatlin Lake. So that was one of the core reasons for the locks. They had to get the ships up and down to the level of this lake. And so there used to be just a little tiny river running through here, and now it's this huge thing. And another very interesting fact is that they intentionally left all of this as fresh water, though it could certainly be easy to make it salty or brackish if they wanted to. And they did that to make sure that no sea life from either of the oceans could survive passing from one to the other. I guess just to keep from cross-contaminating the oceans. But I thought that was pretty cool. And the final reason for the locks is that by raising the ships a little bit, it would be significantly easier to cut down the blasting requirements on the far end of the canal, which we'll see when we get to the other side, because there were some big mountains over there. Boy, that looks really good down there. We got lots of ships going all the way through here. Just fantastic. All right, I'm going to come down just a little bit, maybe try to hit 2,000 feet. Just so we get a nice close-up view. So I'll give you the abbreviated history of the canal as we make our way down to the other end, and I have to truncate it a bit because the full history I discovered is quite lengthy. The first crack at the big ditch started on January 1st of 1881, and it was to be supervised by a French diplomat named Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had recently completed the Suez Canal just 12 years prior. But the challenge, which Lesseps did not face with the Suez Canal, was the huge mountains on the other end of the planned route for this thing. There weren't any mountains he had to blast through for the Suez. So a guy named Gustave Eiffel, yes, that Gustave Eiffel, suggested building some locks on the other end to prevent having to remove the entire mountain. But unfortunately, Mr. Lesseps thought that was a preposterous idea and just ignored it. So with the standing instructions being to remove an entire mountain, the costs and time requirement got to be a little bit more than the French could handle, and people kept dying out here from other tropical diseases. So they decided to halt operations. But by the time they did that, the French had already spent nearly $300 million on it, and that's not the modern equivalent either. That was 1800s dollars, and nearly 22,000 people had died. Again, not from, there were a few accidents, but most of it was from the tropical diseases out here. Those ships look great. So the French sold the project to the United States for $40 million in 1902, which must have been a real steal. And the first U.S. issue that they ran into was not the landscaping, but a brewing conflict between the Panamanian rebels and the government of Colombia, from whom the Panamanians wanted to gain independence as a nation. But always the savvy strategist, then President Teddy Roosevelt decided to back the rebels in exchange for, all right, I may have to go up a little bit because it doesn't like me being this low, so let's get back up to 2,500. And so in exchange for standing behind the rebels, they agreed to let the U.S. basically occupy this area and gain sovereign control of this entire region, which was called the Canal Zone. And they had the control of it until 1999, December 31st of 1999. I'm going to take autopilot off for just a second until we get up to our altitude so that thing does not keep making that noise. Alright, that might be good enough. We'll just see. Well, you're going to keep doing that? We're going to turn you all the way up then. Alright, and good. So we hand this all back over to Panama, December 31st of 1999. And the operational cost for maintaining the locks is recovered by charging tolls based on the amount of cargo ships are carrying through them. And that can either be containers or cubic feet of natural gas or barrels of oil or people in the case of cruise ships. Today the average toll per vessel is around 54,000 US dollars. The highest ever charged was 375,000. Levied upon a Norwegian Cruise Line ship in 2010. And the largest markup was $220,000. A tab picked up by an apparently very desperate captain who got to skip to the front of a line of 90 ships in 2006 because they were working on one of the canals, so everything kind of got stopped up. But if he had waited his turn, the toll would have been just $13,000. And in 1928, Richard Halliburton won the award for the cheapest ticket after paying just 32 cents to swim through the locks. So nobody gets free passage. In the skinny area up here that we're going to see, it gets kind of narrow here, and then it's going to get real narrow where they had to start blasting everything away. It's called the Culbera Cut, and it's going to cross between the most challenging parts of the project, and you're going to see some terraced mountains on the side, and that's where they had to keep blasting and drilling and blasting and drilling, and they had to make it terraced because they kept having avalanches running down into the water. But we'll check that out when we get a little closer to the other end. And this part gets so narrow at the other end that big ships can't pass side by side from each other, so I guess what they have to do is just hang out on one end until one of the ships gets to clear through, and then the other guy can go. We'll see if we got any side-by-side. And the ORBX pack did say that some of the stuff was animated, and I'm not seeing any ships moving around, so maybe the only animation was that little locomotive moving along the side, but we'll check it out again when we get to the other locks. And I turned the live weather off. It looked kind of like this here, but once we got to the other side out here, the clouds got really low and were obscuring some of the scenery, so I just went ahead and shut that off. And there's a little region, let me see if I can see it out the window here. Yeah, see that little boat down there? We'll see it better in a second. This is where their dredging division is, and you can imagine, I'm sure they have to do a lot of dredging out here. And let's see if that looks like a little dredging ship out there. Yeah, they got a little barge next to it. But that's where all those guys are parked. And they get their marching orders. And then right on the other side of this mountain is a 5-star resort hotel, which I guess is kind of a big rainforest destination. And it said there was some kind of, maybe like a gondola or something that crossed over here, although I couldn't see it in the sim. But again, I didn't have the add-on in there before, but I'm not seeing anything like that now. So here's where that resort is over here. And this little bridge right here is what runs all the way from Panama City, which we'll see in a little bit, up to Cologne. Well, that didn't look quite right, unless they had a real cold snap and got a lot of snow out here. Oh, it's starting to disappear, so once we get up on it, that'll probably be gone. Alright, do we have any side-by-side ships out here? Nope, that guy's all by himself. Alright, let's see if we can see that terraced mountain. I think it's going to be right up here on the left. And this bridge up here is called the Centennial, and that was opened in 2004. And that was built to supplement the last bridge that we'll see, which is right up here, called the Bridge of the Americas. And that one was opened in 1962, and it was the first major vehicle crossing of the canal. So we know when that last one was built. The first one we saw was 2017. And then they built this one pretty recently, and up until 1962, even this one wasn't built. So again, I think everyone going across here had to take a ferry, which would have been a pretty short ride, I guess, depending on when they went across it. Got a little bit of melting and drooping there, but that's not too bad. It's not a real big cliff, so I'm not complaining about that. There's a little road that goes right to the water. Maybe that's where the ferry crossing was. But it's pretty wild. I mean, there's, other than the city down here and the city of Cologne, not much else going on out here. Is that a cruise ship coming in there? There's a, the one cruise ship that we have in Jacksonville is a small Carnival ship. It's the only one that's ever left from Jacksonville, and I went on that one time. And there's that terraced area. So this is one of the spots that they see how skinny that gets there. They had to make that terrace because it kept collapsing in there. I think that's called Gold Mountain. But the cruise ships in Jacksonville have to get under something called the Dames Point Bridge, which is the last big bridge on the St. John's before you hit the Atlantic. And it passes just like feet underneath it. And I think the captain got on the horn and said that they actually had to speed up to go under the bridge because it sinks the ship by a couple feet into the water when they go faster to get underneath that. So that was pretty cool. Well, those ships are side by side, but it looks like that guy may be tied up. Maybe he threw a prop blade. Little sailboat out there. Look at that bridge. Looks phenomenal. Really nice. Alright, so these second locks are called Pedro Miguel down here. And a little bit further, these were the original ones here, the Pedro Miguel. And then like on the other end, they had to build up some new ones called the Miraflores lock to get through there. Actually, the Miraflores may have been one of the originals too. Yeah, this one up here is called the Cocoli. That's the newer one. And I'm not sure why they decided to build two sets of locks here instead of just making them all one straight shot like they did on the other end. But I'm sure there was a good reason for that. Alright, let's see what kind of big container ships we got coming through this thing. And let's see if we can spot any locomotives pulling everybody through. See anything moving around down there? Oh, there's a locomotive. Is it moving? It looks like it is. What a nice little touch. I mean, you'd really have to be close to spot that, but luckily we have keen eyes. Another smaller port here, not as big as the one at Cologne, but it looks like they built that one up too, which is fantastic. And there's a little airstrip that you'll see right out here, and on the other side of it, all this colorful stuff out here is called the Albrook Mall. And I read that is the largest mall in Central America. I didn't see how many square feet they have on the roof, but I'm guessing it's pretty big. And would you like to take a stab at where the largest mall in the world is? Well, you won't be surprised to hear that it's China. Largest of anything, just guess China. Pretty good chance you'll get it right. And off to our right here over the nose, which we really can't see because the stack's in the way there, is the Panama Pacifico International Airport, which is still called Howard Air Force Base in little NavMap, and that was a U.S. installation until it was handed over to Panama after 1999. That bridge looks amazing. You can already tell that's going to look good. Yep, the only thing that I would gripe about with this scenery is that they didn't give any elevation to this stuff down here. A lot of the other ports we've seen, they did all that. Look at that ship park there. That's great. All of these right here. And there's a little guy dredging out there. Dredging away. Okay, before we head over downtown Panama City, we'll check out this collection of what used to be islands out here before this causeway was built. And this big white thing that we're going to see here in just a second, there's their big soccer stadium there. This big white thing that's going to come around the side of our little window pillar here is their convention center. Of course, every big city has to have a convention center. And there it is. Wonder what that is. Doesn't look like a ship, does it? But that's nice. Look, they put the little oil terminal out there. It's the little things that matter. And right on the other side of the convention center here, we're going to see a little collection of very colorful buildings, and that is their Biology and Ecology Museum. See these right here? That's what that is. That is all really well modeled. Looks really nice. And this place right here is called the Harbor Island Residences, and it looks like those are condos because I found real estate listings for them. And if you're shopping, you can pick up a one-bedroom place for around $230,000 US. But I read they looked kind of run down for people that had left Google reviews for it. Look at all these little ships out here. And when we get to Little Nav, I don't know if it was in Little NavMap or the Google Maps, but there's a huge jetliner sitting right here in this open spot. How that got there or why it's there, I have no idea. But it's sitting right here. But boy, can you imagine the views from that place? Alright, so here's where the forts were. Also U.S. forts originally. And this was called Fort Grant out here. And the only thing left of any of it is a little bit right up here that you really just can't see much of. But they had some stuff out here too, some cannons and stuff. You just can't see much of it anymore. And now, they used to have bike trails like off-road bikers, mountain bikers would go up there and stuff. But now they said it's all private property and you can't get up there anymore. Which was a big disappointment to the locals because, as you can probably imagine, I'm sure the views were just spectacular from over there. There's a big cruise ship. See, this is nice. They put all the little boats in here, elevated the harbor so they weren't sunk into the water. Real nice. What's all that beeping about? Has that altimeter reset itself again? Nope, it's not going to let me change it. Hopefully it won't keep beeping like that. And right on the other side of this thing, if we can see it, there's a little go-kart track right here that the locals also apparently just love. Yeah, you can kind of see the little track there. So that's where Fort Grant was. And they said that once they disarmed that thing, which I think was like 1948, 49, they just buried most of it. So there's not much left to see. Alright, well I'm just going to have to take the autopilot off if it's going to keep doing that. Because that's a little bit irritating. Alright, we're going to come around this little point sticking out right in front of it. Alright, I'm turning the autopilot off. This little point that's going to be sticking out right over here, and there's some monuments down there. And they got a big road running all the way around it, which looks pretty cool. And on the very tip is a monument to all the French and what they contributed to the area. And that's their Metropolitan Cathedral right there, which took 108 years to build. And I don't know what it is with old churches and taking hundreds of years to build them, but that place looks pretty cool from the ground. There's what the little monument to the French is. And as you can tell from all these skyscrapers out here, there is quite a bit of money. And not all of it has been cleaned, at least not until very recently. During the 70s and 80s, this place was a real hot spot for money laundering. And apparently it got so bad that in the late 1980s, George H.W. Bush sent the U.S. military in here to depose Manuel Noriega. Look at some of these buildings. Look at this one right here. This is called the F&F Tower. And this is the tallest building in town at almost 1,000 feet, and that's a big Marriott hotel. That thing looks like a sail right there. And here's something I stumbled on completely by accident. As I was looking for the tallest buildings, I found out that of the 20 tallest buildings in the city, only one was built before 2010. And of the tallest 50, only 4 were built before 2000. So I don't know if all of a sudden they just decided that once they had the Panama Canal back, they'd start building these skyscrapers or what, but that's when all that happened. Really, in the last 20 years, they built all of these up. And just on the other side of this little treed area here sticking out in the water is an area called Old Panama. And it was the location of the first major settlement out here, founded in 1519. And it became the jumping off point for expeditions down the Pacific coast of South America. And it was destroyed several times by fires after it was founded over the next 150 years. But the fatal blow came in 1670 when the city and its roughly 10,000 residents was sacked by the Welsh privateer Henry Morgan, who didn't attack from the sea, but came from the Atlantic side, crossed through the jungles there, wrecked the entire town, burned it to the ground, killed thousands of people. And the whole thing could have been prevented if they had cell phones back then, because what Morgan didn't know is that Spain and England had signed a treaty that had ended the hostilities between them. So they wound up capturing him, imprisoning him for a while, but then they let him go free of charge and even gave him an award of some kind. So how do you like that? All right, and just like that, we're going to make our speedy descent into Tocumen International, Mike Papa Tango Oscar. And there was, again, a small mod pack available for this place, so I don't know what all it touched up, but I did fly into that one before with the mods on it, and I didn't see anything that looked amazing. But if the taxiway markers are correct, and if that's important to you, they appear to be fixed now. And this one was also a former U.S. military base known as Paitilla Point Airfield. Hence the ICAO code, which still sounds kind of like that. And they started building that in the 1940s, really ramping it up after Pearl Harbor happened in 1941. And then after the war, they started building it to what we see today. It opened for civilian traffic in 1947. And now it's the primary international airport for this area. All right, let's start slowing down. Get some flaps going. And it was almost the site of the world's longest regular non-stop commercial flight. In 2016, Emirates Airlines said they would open a route from Dubai to Panama City, but they decided they couldn't make much money from it, so they abandoned that idea. We're getting a little popping down there, aren't we? And now it's time for a little aviation trivia for you guys. What is currently the longest non-stop commercial flight in the world? Take a guess at what that is. It's from JFK to Singapore at roughly 9,500 miles. It takes about 18 hours and 40 minutes. And I hope some of you guys will tell me that you've taken that flight. If anyone has, let me know. That would be a long haul. If you've done it, I'll give you a shout out on our next video. I've never done anything close to that. I think my longest airliner flight was probably a transatlantic I did years ago. And we're coming in a little higher, aren't we? But this is the Twin Otter, the king of short takeoffs and landings. Give it full flaps. So once we come down, I'll pull right over. Hopefully we'll hit that second taxiway there. I'm not going to drive all the way to the airport. And I'll pull over a little NavMap so you can see some of the stuff from the satellites. And after seeing a review that actually was posted about 2 months ago probably from AvAngel for Idaho's Deadly 3, another ORBX pack, I decided to get it just to see if I could do it. It's out in the Canyon Creek area. And not only is it an incredible landing challenge, but the scenery is just beautiful out there. So just for fun, I think we'll probably take that flight if I can get to the point where I can land at all the runways. There's actually 4. There's a little bonus runway, which is the hardest of them all, which is up by a little fire spotting station. And if I can pull it off, we'll take that. It'll be a pretty short flight, but it looks good enough to qualify for a neat flight for us. Alright, flaps up. And that was good timing, because here we are at our taxiway. Once again, just beautiful mountainous landscape out here. Just looks amazing. Alright, I'm just going to pull over right here. Maybe we can find a little run-up spot to park in. Actually, right in front of us looks like a little indentation there. We're parked right there. For now. Alright, that works for me. You guys alright with this? I'm going to send the cops out here and tell us to move it. Okay, shut her down. And just so we don't have to listen to all the whining and whirring, I'm going to shut it completely down. Alright, in the off chance that you don't know where the Panama Canal is, there it is. So there's South America, there's North America, and here's where we are. Alright, so here's where we left from, Cologne, and boy, you can tell that is an industrial place, huh? And initially I thought that maybe the original old school ports were out here somewhere, but I don't think that's the case. I'm going to show you where those were when we look at the Chares River here in just a minute. So we pulled up, came over here, and here's where let me just kind of show you some of the things I mentioned. Here's where those parks are, and you can see they look pretty nice here. But apparently they have some garbage issues down there, but maybe they've cleaned that up since those reviews were left. They were a couple years old. Looks pretty clean to me. But again, we're probably to 5,000 feet above it. And then here's where Battery Morgan is. And as you can see, there's nothing of any military significance left there, except the spot where the cannons were. Boy, and that's about what it looked like with all those ships, wasn't it? Maybe not quite that many, but there were a lot of them out there. And there's another little strip over here if you want to take off from over there. But let me show you Fort San Lorenzo out here. So this was the original area where everything was built up by the Spanish. And what they would do, let me back up a little bit. They'd come into Old Panama, which was right down here, which we'll take a look at in just a minute, and then trek all the way through the jungle over here. And mind you, back then, this was not a giant lake like it is now. It was just this little river right here that snaked all the way down here until it hit these mountains. But then they'd catch up with the river, ride it out here to where Fort San Lorenzo is. And I don't know what this looks like in the sim because I didn't fly over it. Maybe ORBX modified that too. That's kind of neat looking. And it doesn't appear that there's any other remnants of the city at all. Again, that would have been, what, almost 500 years ago? Maybe there's some stuff down under the tree canopies. And then here's where the double dam is, which we got a nice look at. That was kind of a nice treat because I thought, well, we did deviate from the plan a little bit. So that's why we got to see that. But that looked pretty much just like that in the sim. So that was cool. It was even dry in the middle like that. So here's the locks. Here's the old ones out here. These are the Gatlin locks. And there's where the little trains would run up and down the side to haul everyone through. And they have some tugs down there, so maybe some ships they do still kind of push and pull through there. These guys are getting a little nudge from the tugs there, but maybe they're just trying to get them hooked up to the locomotives that haul them around. And then here's the newer ones, built in 2016. I didn't realize that was that recently that they built these bigger ones. But those look beautiful in the sim, really just beautiful. So then we wound our way down here, and here's where the dredging division is. And look, they even had a little, about in that spot too, the little barges where they put all the dirt and stuff. And then here's where that nice resort is. Look at this place. Gambia Rainforest Reserve. Can we see the little gondola ride? I don't see it, but it probably goes from here to here. I'm guessing because there's nothing else around here. So that was that. And here's where it gets real skinny. And then here's where that terraced mountain was. And you can see on both sides of it, it's pretty terraced. But apparently this was the toughest part for them to blast through right here. For as high as this was, which wasn't all that high, this is the Continental Divide in this area. So everything else was pretty flat except right here, which is where they had to spend a lot of time and effort and energy and dynamite. Here's the Centennial Bridge, which is the newer of the two. And then here's the original one down here, Bridge of the Americas, coming right over here. There's the new lock on this side, and here's the double set of locks that they had, the original ones. So this was probably just all dirt and grass and trees before they dug that one out. And then here's that huge mall. Look at this place. I wonder how big that is. And it looks like they kind of just like started building this and then like, oh, let's throw a few more on. No, let's throw some more on over here. Let's throw some more on over here. We got to be the biggest mall in Central America. Let's just keep adding on to it, which apparently they did. And then here's what's called Howard Air Force Base, which now is a commercial airline place for Panama. Not the main one, though. That's the one we landed at. Here's the convention center. Here's the Biomuseo, which looked just like that in the sim. And this looked just like that, too. That looked really good, actually, in the sim. They did a great job with that. And here's our little mountains out here. Yep, it was the Google map. If you check this out on the Google map, you'll see it. There's a huge plane. It looks like an Embraer, maybe. Parked out there because it got those stubby-looking tail engines on it. And then here's Fort Gatlin, or Grant, sorry. And it's kind of neat how they have this kind of winding around like a corkscrew up here. Well, it didn't look like they buried the whole thing. You can kind of see where they had some ramparts and stuff up there. But that's all private now. You can't even get up there anymore. There's a little go-kart place. Let's see if you can still see it. Yeah, this has been completely torn down and buried out here. But there was some cannons up there originally too. We had our cruise ship out there, all these little boats out here, just wonderful. There's a soccer stadium. So here's the France Plaza. All this looked great too, where they got the little monument to the French out here. They got a bunch of museums down here, and there's that Metropolitan Cathedral, which looked way better in the sim. Of course, we were seeing it from a side angle, so that looked really cool. And there's that big road that runs all the way around it. And it must have been low tide in the sim because there was a lot of mud and silt and stuff coming all the way out here when we flew over it. Some nice parks there, gigantic buildings. Let's see if we can spot the F&F tower. I put El Tornillo, which probably means tornado because it's twisty shaped. That's what the locals call it, but that's the F&F tower. And then here's the biggest one in town, the big Marriott. But all that looked really beautiful. We kind of flew right over the top of this, but there wasn't much to look at except some hotels and resorts probably. I wonder what they got going down here. That looks kind of commercialish, doesn't it? Doesn't really look much like a park. This does over here a little bit more. And then over here is where old Panama was, and you can still see, this is all ruins now. It looks like really, when you look at it from the ground, and you can tell looking at it here, that it probably looks a lot like it did when they walked away from it 350 years ago. And so after Captain Morgan did his thing and tore the place to the ground, they decided that maybe living so close to the coast wasn't great, even though he came from this side. And then that's when they decided to start rebuilding out in this area where the city is now. Here's another big mall out here. And it looked like most of these were hotels, condos, things like that. Didn't appear that a lot of them were like commercial buildings, office buildings, and things like that. A lot of this stuff seemed to be residential. Nice golf course out there. And, of course, the horse racing track. You got to have one of the, and another little stadium. I probably got a little closer and taken a look at that one. I didn't notice that before. And then we came on in. That was it. Nice short hop flight. Learned a lot, as always. Looked pretty good. Aside from that white stuff that was out here, I'm sure that has to do with the add-on. Without it, I don't remember seeing that at all. But if you just look down to the side, maybe you won't notice that. All in all, is it worth getting the add-on pack from ORBX? Well, I think I bought it on sale for $5 or $6. And if you want to fly over here and check it out, I think it was a dramatic improvement. Once the white stuff went away, it looked really, really cool. All the ships were a nice touch. And, of course, the little animated locomotive was just awesome. And if you want to take off from here, this is actually a really cool departure because you kind of fly right over the city, and there's a little building with like a waving Panamanian flag on it. That was a neat takeoff there. Probably a great little landing, too. But as you can see, it's a pretty short runway. It looks like, how long is that? Well, it's almost 6,000 feet, so that's not too short. But that's that, guys. Had an absolute blast. Next trip is going to be Sao Paulo. I have lots of requests for that. A lot of people looking forward to that one, but it's going to take a little bit of time for me to prepare for that one because the place is massive. Lots of stuff to see, so I'm going to have to draw that out carefully to make sure we can see as much as we possibly can. Can't wait to see you guys again in the skies. Later.